I'm going to ask each of us on the panel if we agree with the 5 commitments to join the hands of the governors of the national central banks, and if there are NCAs represented at the highest level, to actually raise your hand if you're prepared to honor those 5 commitments. We have 3 years to deliver. Hands up for those who are willing. All right. Photos have been taken, whatever it takes.
Did you know that half of Europeans lack the basic financial literacy needed to thrive? And in fact, 60% of Europeans with low financial literacy are women. In today's episode, we want to explore how this affects people's financial decision-making. What can be done to increase financial literacy levels, especially among women? What does it mean for central banks like the ECB and their pursuit of price stability? And we want to find out what Christine Lagarde and other central bank governors committed to support financial literacy in Europe. To find the answers to these questions, the podcast team and I attended an event on financial literacy with central bank governors from across Europe, moderated by ECB President Christine Lagarde. And we sat down with Professor Annamaria Lusardi, a renowned expert in the field of financial literacy from Stanford University, who also spoke at the event. Welcome to the podcast, Anna.
Hello, Stefania. Glad to be on this podcast.
Anna, you were in the ECB panel discussion with President Lagarde on financial literacy. She and also the other central bank governors on stage were very clear that we all need to step up our actions to increase financial knowledge. And they've shown real commitment to do so. At the event, President Lagarde referred to you as the queen of financial literacy. So I'm sure you can fill us in. What is financial literacy and why is it so relevant?
Financial literacy is knowledge and understanding of financial concepts and risks, and the skills, motivation, and confidence to apply such knowledge and understanding in order to make effective decisions across a range of financial contexts to improve the financial well-being of individuals and society, and to enable participation in economic life.
Okay, in simple words.
Yes, so it is about the future. It is about making decisions and acquiring that knowledge and confidence that allows us to make this decision. And remember that the ultimate objective is improve well-being for us, but also for society.
Okay, so you say it's about being able to make informed decisions. What are these decisions? What does it mean in practice?
Well, there are many decisions we have to make today. We are a lot more in charge of decisions, for example, about our pensions, about understanding risks, but also understanding opportunities. And I have to say it's also about being resilient, being able to withstand economic shocks, as we have seen, for example, during the pandemic. So, there are so many decisions we have to make today. And I think financial literacy allows us to make better decisions.
So in the end, one could say that is about being financially independent.
Financial independence is the ultimate objective of financial literacy. It is about being able and free to make choices.
Yes.
So financial independence is such an important objective, and I think it's the ultimate goal of financial literacy.
Annamaria, so how do you assess or measure financial literacy levels? What is that you ask people to check their level of financial literacy?
We have designed 3 questions to measure financial literacy. They have become known over time as the Big 3.
The Big 3. Okay.
Perhaps because they measure these basic but fundamental concepts in knowledge, in financial knowledge. For example, we test about whether people know interest compounding or the fact that interest compound on interest. But our question is, in fact, very simple. We ask, suppose that you have 100 euro in a saving account and the interest rate is 2% per year. After 5 years, how much do you think you would have in the account if you left the money to grow? And we list the potential answer, and we say, is it more than 102 euro? Is it less than 102 or exactly 102?
Dear listeners, any idea what the answer is? We'll reveal the correct response at the end of the episode. What are the other two questions of the big three, Annamaria?
The other question is about inflation and whether people understand that if inflation is higher than the interest rate they can get on the saving account, of course, they lose purchasing power. And the third is about risk diversification and is comparing investing in a single stock versus a stock, mutual funds, and what is the riskier choice. So these three concepts, capacity to do a simple interest rate calculation, knowledge about inflation and what inflation done, and risk diversification are a way to assess, do you know the ABC of financial literacy?
It's clear from what we've heard so far that financial literacy is important. All of us should be competent and confident to make sound financial decisions for ourselves and our families. But why do central banks care? At the financial literacy event, by the way, we will of course link the full recording in the show notes. President Lagarde put it in very simple words.
Central banks have a definite interest in making sure that financial literacy at large, but particularly financial literacy of women, given that they are at a disadvantage, actually improves over the course of time. It will help us doing a better job, and it will be helpful not just for the cause of equality, which is a moral imperative anyway, but also for our economies.
Annamaria, during the panel discussion, I was struck by a chart that you projected. It was about how people with low and high financial literacy perceive the ability of central banks to achieve their price stability mandate.
I think this is one of the most striking findings from this great data that the ECB has been collecting, the Consumer Expectations Survey. And indeed, when we ask people what are the chances that the ECB will maintain price stability over the next 3 years, and we look at how people have answered this question when, in fact, the ECB was raising the interest rate in order to fight inflation, we see this divergence at a certain point as interest rates go up, indeed to fight inflation. Those with high financial literacy think that the ECB will be able to achieve the price stability, versus those with low financial literacy have now even lower expectations about the ECB being able to achieve this price stability. This really speaks of the importance, I think, of the central bank, first of all, to explain what they do and to communicate in a way that is understood by everybody in the economy, and in particularly those with low level of financial literacy.
From the findings, it's clear that a lack of financial literacy has a profound impact on the work of central banks. It impacts the effectiveness of their monetary policy, obviously. Only if people understand what the central bank's actions are and what is the impact, for example, of them raising or lowering their interest rates and what it means for them, for the citizens, these citizens will also be able to trust central banks' action and adapt their thinking and their behavior and develop meaningful expectations about the future course of inflation. But there's more. A lack of financial literacy may also impair financial stability, and it is certainly relevant for the work of banking supervision. This is exactly what Claudia Buch, chair of the ECB's supervisory board, said.
But our mandate is to keep banks sound and stable in the interest of depositors and also people who borrow from the banks. And of course, the better people understand the economics of borrowing, lending, the better their financial knowledge, the easier it is also for us to keep the bank stable, so that investment decisions that are being made are sound. So this is why it's immediately important that there's a high degree of financial literacy in the population. That's immediately important for supervisors.
So we now know how a lack of financial literacy can affect a central bank's mandate. And we've also seen that there is an increased awareness of the issue, but also clear willingness to act. At this event, we've seen really a commitment by central bankers to do something about it. But any action needs to be bolstered by sound academic evidence. Annamaria, based on your extensive research, What are the main drivers of financial literacy?
So when we look at who are the people who are more financially literate, what we find, there is an important effect of gender, age, education, and income. So in other words, the people who have the lowest level of financial literacy, unfortunately, are women, the young, those with low education and low income. And, as a result, these are vulnerable groups because we know that lack of financial literacy has a lot of consequences.
Yeah. And before we talk about the gender gap between men and women, which is absolutely relevant in the context of financial literacy as well, the overall level of financial literacy in Europe is very low. What can be done to increase the overall level of financial literacy in general?
I think there are many actions to be taken. It's certainly very important to start in school. If we have financial education in school, first of all, we can reach all of the young. And also we see that there is a spillover effect when we have a financial education in school. For example, we see that not just the student learn, but also the parents. And interestingly, it is the daughters who are teaching the parents, in particular the parents of low socioeconomic status. So there is, I think, an important spillover effect, and which speaks of the importance of having financial education in school. But the workplace as well is another place where to do education. The adults are at work, and also there is an incentive for the employer as well to provide financial education, because some of our data shows that many people spend time at work worrying about their own financial problems or their personal finances. So we all benefit from having financial education in the workplace, including the employer. And third, I think there is an important role for technology. Today, be able to reach people when they need it, provide apps, provide information, and make it available at the fingertip. I think there are many opportunities to do financial education, and we should start as soon as possible.
So start learning early and keep learning throughout. And Governor Joachim Nagel from Deutsche Bundesbank compared learning about finance to learning a language. Let's listen to what he said.
When you try to learn a new language, and you try to start this in the age of 25 or maybe 35, it takes you much longer. When you start to learn a language when you're 5, 6, 7 years old, then it goes much, much easier. What I would like to say is that we have to start from the beginning in the school. It should be part of the curriculum.
So it is really about early education you mentioned. Why early education is so crucial?
I think it's important to socialize about money as early as possible. I have to say I've interviewed many people famous in finance, and always they refer to something that happened in their childhood, some teaching they've had from their family, some experience they've had. I think that early education can be very important. I always have to say, perhaps we should start financial education when the tooth fairy comes and we get some money. That might be just a good time to do so. But also in life, there are many useful teachable moments also when we can learn more about money, and we should take advantage of all of them.
Using teachable moments, indeed, as opportunities to provide information about finance is very important. When we are about to take out a major loan, for example, to buy a home, or when we start thinking about saving for retirement, we are, of course, more receptive to information about financial concepts. But another important aspect is to know whom do you want to reach. As Banca d'Italia Governor Fabio Panetta pointed out when speaking about their activities to increase financial literacy in Italy.
We reach the population in several ways. One that is probably the most effective one is the joint venture, let me call it this way, between the Bank of Italy and the Italian public TV channels. We participate in TV programs with RAI, and we target hours in which you can reach the weaker groups of the population in terms of financial literacy, early morning and afternoon. And we introduce the issue as not in a professorial lecture, but as a conversation between our employees, those who are in charge of financial education at the bank, and the presenter of the TV program. And we introduce basic financial education concepts.
Okay, let's focus now on the gap, the famous financial literacy gap between men and women. Why is there a gap? I know it's a 100 million euro question, but I think if we manage to start answering this, maybe we are better at finding solutions as well.
This gap is so pervasive and is so stubborn that it's very hard to provide just one explanation for it. There are a variety of explanations that have been offered to explain the gender gap, but I want to focus on one in particular because we have seen a pattern that exists everywhere and across countries as well, which is when we look at the way in which women answer the financial literacy question, they disproportionately say, I do not know, when they answering this question with respect to men. And we did this experiment. At a certain point, we asked the financial literacy question, the big three, in the traditional way. And then later on, we took away the do not know options.
So you basically run the survey, meaning people ask these questions and I don't know is there as a possible answer. And then after some time, you run the same survey, but among the questions, you don't have I don't know.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then we compare the answer between these two surveys. And what we found is that women know more than they think they know.
Ah.
But unfortunately, they are not confident on their answer, even when we look at the simpler questions. And by comparing these two surveys, we have been able to calculate just about how much of that gender gap is due to confidence. And, about 1/3 of the gender gap in financial literacy can be related to this lack of confidence. So we have not explained it all, but I think we have found an important determinant of that gender difference, which also gives us suggestions on what to do. Sometimes when we address these gender differences, we have to be mindful of what to do. If we want to address the gender gap in financial literacy, we want to improve knowledge, but also confidence.
And Governor Klaas-Knot from the Dutch Central Bank also made an interesting observation during the discussion based on a survey that they conducted. Let's listen to what he said.
Men and women traditionally tend to do different financial transactions in a family. So
Explain.
If it comes to the mortgage, sort of the big financial transaction, usually it's left to the men. If it comes to grocery shopping and the small, let's say, weekly transactions, then women have a higher precedence there in these types of payments. And that, of course, leads to an unequal, I would say, decision-making power in a relationship, which I think is also something that is, in principle, unwelcome.
Why would the gender gap still be a problem?
What we see is that women are normally in charge of the day-to-day financial management, but they often do not take decisions like investing for retirement or investing for the future or buying a house or those big expenses. They shy away from some of these other and bigger decisions. Women might eventually suffer from poverty at retirement or not having accumulated enough for the future or, and for example, enough pensions and so on. So, of course, it's not that financial literacy can address all of the problems. We also have a system in place that help women to do so. But there are risks, indeed, that if women don't do that and if women only focus on the day-to-day financial management, that they are be left exposed to the risk later on or don't have enough or not being financially secured.
And let's turn a moment to fintech and digital evolution and all these things. The situation there, do we have data, do we have studies that already speak about it? What's the situation? In terms of gender gap, does it increase the gender gap? Does it reduce it?
I want to mention first that when it comes to fintech, some people think it is going to be a substitute for financial literacy. And I have to say financial literacy and fintech are very much complement, in the sense that you need to be financially literate to use fintech well. And we have actually some of our studies that shows that those with low financial literacy tend to use fintech in such a way that makes them worse off. So yet again, fintech, I think, is going to be best used when combined with financial literacy. But there are risks when it comes to gender differences that potentially the fintech might make this gender gap even bigger.
Oh.
Right? And so, the fintech plus the financial literacy gap might feed into each other. We need to be mindful of the gender gap, both in digital literacy and in financial literacy, and not making a double negative.
And where do you see the role of central banks in closing the gender gap? The conversation among central bankers, the President Lagarde, the Chair Buch, and you was very interesting because it was very much also focusing trying to understand how do we close the gender gap in financial literacy.
So fortunately today, 5 commitments were made on how to improve financial literacy going forward. But I want to stress a few of them. I think it takes visionary leaders to improve financial literacy because the benefit of financial literacy tend to come into the future, sometime the faraway future. So I think that everyone need to raise the voice for financial literacy, in particularly central bankers. Central banks are very respected institution, and I think if we all can raise the voice for financial literacy, it would be a very important step.
You mentioned 5 commitments, Annamaria. At the financial literacy event, President Lagarde and central bank governors spoke a lot about what central banks can do and presented various initiatives that they are already in place to address financial literacy and the gender gap in particular, of course. All the initiatives by all central banks in the euro area are available on our website. So check it out to see if there's something going on in your country as well. We will link, of course, in the show notes. But the open question is, how can we scale up? How can we make sure that everyone in Europe can benefit of the initiatives for financial literacy? This is what the 5 commitments by euro area central banks are all about. They pledged to being a voice for change and to continue raising awareness. Second, they committed to create a central bank financial literacy network, which will, and this is the 3rd commitment, which will be extended to the national authorities in charge of consumers' protection. 4th, they agreed to harmonize financial literacy data across Europe. And 5th, they will enhance financial literacy efforts by targeting exactly those teachable moments we were talking about before, meaning key life moments such as early education, major financial decisions, or pension planning. And as you heard at the beginning of the episode, President Lagarde and all the governors present in the room raised their hand to underline their commitment. So stay tuned for more actions on financial literacy because, as President Lagarde said,
we have good news because given the importance of the topic, we're not going to make it a one-shot event, but it's going to be a 3-year cycle. So when we see each other in a year's time, in 2 years' time, we will have to account for what we are soon going to commit to do.
So real action is underway, but in the words of Bundesbank President Joachim Nagel,
this is not a 100-meter run. It is more like a marathon. So we have to work constantly on improving, helping that this gap could be closed.
Annamaria, earlier we discussed the questions that you use to assess financial literacy. And you ask one of them. You have €100, you put it in a savings account, you get 2% interest a year, and you leave it for 5 years. How much do you get after 5 years? So what's the correct answer?
Yeah, so the correct answer is more than 102 euro. This is just a 2% calculation in the context of interest rate.
So, and if you got it right, you're probably one of the 50% of Europeans or 40% of women who have a good level of financial literacy. And maybe you're thinking, what can I do myself to support financial literacy and potentially close the gender gap? What's the answer?
I have a simple answer to this, and it is talk to your children about money, and in particular to your daughters.
Thank you. And at this stage, our listeners know that we always ask our guests about a hot tip. Annamaria, what's your recommendation today for our listeners?
I would say take good care of your finances. Spend a little bit of time each week, can be even 5-10 minutes, to look at your finances. For example, maybe set up a budget, look at how you are doing, think a little bit how you can improve your finances. Are you in a good situation? Are you where you want to be? Do you need a financial checkup? So here is my hot tip. Take good care of yourself and your finances.
Excellent. So health and wealth.
Health and wealth.
Thank you so much, Annamaria. This brings us to the end of this episode of the ECB podcast. We've explored the concept of financial literacy and why it matters to each and every one of us. We learned about the gender gap in financial literacy, and we heard that financial literacy can help central banks do their job to keep prices stable. And this is why the ECB and several national central banks have committed to step up their actions to increase financial literacy, especially amongst women. You've been listening to the ECB podcast with Stefania Secola. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. And in the spirit of Europe, I'd like to end in Greek and say, ta leme. Until next time, thanks for listening.